Ethan, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm always excited to talk to somebody when I see consciousness, when I see the mind come on. So, as most podcasters, you're in the podcast world, obviously, or at least doing them. Uh, you book far out and then you check again, right before. So when I looked, it's like this was my one today. I was like, oh hell yeah! So I'm super stoked, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, happy you're talking to the right guy. Love talking about, thinking about, and doing research on the conscious mind and how to
Yeah.
control it. So great to be here.
Yeah, let's just jump in. The conscious mind. Like what do you even think, what is the conscious mind from your perspective?
Sure. So, what I do research on in particular, the conscious mind is really broad, but I focus on how people can control themselves. What does that mean, control yourself? How people can align their thoughts, feelings, or behaviors with their goals. So what that means is if you want to think, feel, or behave a particular way, how can you bring those outcomes to fruition? How can you make that happen? So that might be in a sporting event, like making sure you don't sink under pressure and like execute when you need to execute without your nerves getting the best of you. It may mean in a relationship being able to maintain your cool when you're getting angry at someone else. It may, on the opposite end of the spectrum, not just negative stuff, but positive. How do we amplify positive feelings if we want to feel more positive? And for thinking, it's how do you stop thinking about that set of thoughts that's driving you nuts, that's keeping you up at night, that's keeping you anxious. And so that's the terrain that we do research on. We use science to try to figure out how self-control works.
Man, so as most of my listeners know, this is a very close to the heart topic. I'm a person that can experience very intense anxiety, and I've had my bouts with it where it's exactly what you're talking about there. It's that loop in my head where for me, again, it was sleep. This was my kicker offer that sent me down a tailspin. I'm not going to sleep. I'm not going to sleep. And then the next thing you know, you're up for 4 days. And the later you go to sleep, and you're just going, God, I got to sleep. I got to sleep. I got to sleep. And now I fuck with myself, right? Like my plan every night is to stay up all night. I turn on, Law and Order. I'm like, all right, I'm going to watch this shit. And then I'm going to watch it all night long is my plan. And the next thing I know, I'm asleep, right? But
Yeah.
I figured out how to trick the loop, right?
Yeah.
But that's what
Well,
it is, right?
well, I
It's
love
it's a
so
loop.
Elliot, you'll have to forgive me. So
Yeah,
I'm from the East Coast. I'm from
me
Brooklyn. I,
too.
I grew
Me
up
too.
there. Oh, you and when I
We're
get
good.
excited, I intervene. So I just jump
We're
in.
good.
So
We're
we're all
good.
good.
Don't stress.
All right, excellent. So I just wrote this book. It's called Chatter: The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. And it's all about getting stuck in a thought loop. So our ability to like think about problems, to anticipate future stressors, let's say, or like, oh, in your case, let's say I have a match with someone else. Let me think about all the ways this might go south, right? And then that's an amazing capacity. And it's a capacity that makes human beings unique. My ability to like think about what could go wrong and then plan for it, this is great. My
It's
ability to
why
like
we're here. It's why we've evolved and we're still
right,
around.
we are the alpha species, right? Like we can go back in time and think about screw ups, not just to make ourselves feel bad, but to learn from those mistakes and become better people, better relationship partners, and better athletes, and whatever you want to be better at. Like that's a great capacity. But for a lot of us, a lot of the time, that skill runs off course and we end up getting stuck in these thought loops. So if we start like harping on the past and our failures, we call that rumination. And that predicts things like sadness and depression. If it's about the future or what we're dealing with now, like, oh my God, what if this happens? What if this goes wrong? Blah, blah, blah. That's anxiety. And, that's linked to sleepless nights. And I think you mentioned when you were talking about your Law and Order tool. I did not talk about the Law and Order hack in my book, but it's interesting. What I do talk about in the book are these like 20, 26 or so. They're different science-based tools that exist to manage to kind of regain control of our mind when it's controlling us. And what's interesting about these hacks, these tools, as I call them, they're often really simple tools. They kind of just shift your perspective. Actually, it's interesting because I'm looking at you right now, and on your shirt, listeners can't see it. It says Jiu Jitsu. I often talk about the kinds of science-based tools that we've identified as.
Thanks for bringing up my shirt, by the way, l8marshall.com/shop. Grab a shirt.
I,
It's full fire.
and anyone who's listening, I like, oath. I was not put up to do this. Go listen to me on other podcasts. You'll hear me talk about what I do as psychological jujitsu. Because what we're doing is we are using these tools that we've evolved to manage these conversations we have with ourselves that sometimes make us upset and anxious. And with these, like, they're little shifts, but we're switching momentum that our thoughts have in ways that I think can be quite powerful, and not unlike the very simple shifts that you do in the arena, the octagon. These are subtle shifts. If anyone's watched jiu-jitsu, I'm guessing a lot of people here have,
No, you're
but they make
100%
a
right.
huge difference.
And for me, look, the whole jiu-jitsu thing, like, yes, there's this competitive aspect to it, but there's most of the people that practice jiu-jitsu never step onto a mat to compete, and they never step into a cage to fight. So what is the bigger thing? What is the reason that people are doing jiu-jitsu? What is the beauty and the magic behind it? It can't be the arm bars and the chokes and the actual moves. It's how it helps us deal with our life, you know? And so rarely, for example, what you're talking about here with thoughts, so rarely does anybody do a move to beat me where I'm just like, oh my God, what was that? I've never seen that before. Like, that happens in the beginning to everybody, right? But then once, 3-4 years in, no, it rarely happens. You know exactly how someone's going to beat you. You're like, oh, that's exactly how you did this. And it's the same thing with our thoughts, right? Like, you can follow the thought loop all the way through and how you got yourself there and things like that. There's no magic behind it, I guess. There's no like, oh my Lord, this is craziness.
Yeah, well, I think there are two categories of experience here. There's some people who they're experiencing distress, they're anxious, they're sadness, they're depressed, and they don't know how to get out of it. They're not even sure what they're in, right? Like, what am I feeling? It doesn't feel good, but they don't even know how to get out of it. Then there are a lot of other people who know exactly what they're feeling, and they know exactly where they want to be, right? Less anxious, more positive. But they can't bring that to fruition, that goal, right? Like, lots of people say when you're feeling anxious, hey, just try to feel better, focus on the bright side. Well, you know what?
Yeah, no shit.
Easier said than done, right? Like, you said it more poetically than I am. I can't say that here. I'm still earshot, right? At the university, like, exactly. Like, duh. Yeah, I don't want to feel this way, but I can't do it differently. And what I think is empowering and important about the science is science has revealed tools that can help people do this, right? Lots and lots of tools. Different tools work for different people in different situations. There's no single magic pill, but there are a lot of different things we can do to take that edge off. So let me make it concrete.
Yeah.
I'll give you one of my favorite psychological jujitsu moves. This is something we did some research on in the lab. So a lot of people, when they're under stress, when they're ruminating, worrying, they do something. There are records of them doing this one thing I'm going to tell you about throughout time, and it's often been ridiculed. You see people under stress talking to themselves using their own name, like, all right, Ethan, what the hell are you doing? Right? Or, Elliot, wow, man,
Sure. Yeah,
get your act together. Athletes do this a ton. A lot of people think that this is a sign of narcissism, of being overly consumed with yourself. We've done studies on this, as of others. And what we found is this is a tool that you can use to help break yourself out of these destructive negative thought loops. And we call it distanced self-talk. You're getting some distance and talking to yourself from a distance. And here's how we think it works. I think many people have had the experience of it being much easier to give advice to someone else than to take our own advice, right? Like, what is it? Like, do as I say, not as I do, right? Like this, if a friend or a loved one comes to you with a problem, my guess is, or let's say a student in your case, right? Like, a student struggling with something, they come to you, it's relatively easy for you to coach them essentially, right? To give them advice about how to deal with the situation in a very purposeful, useful way. You've got space from their problem. You can be objective. But when it's happening to us, it's often really hard to be objective. And so what we've learned is you can use language to help you coach yourself like you would be giving advice to someone else. And so you use your name or the pronoun you. Think about when we use names. We use names when we think about and refer to other people, right? Like 99% of the time when I'm using a name, it's when I'm talking about or addressing someone else. So the link between a name and thinking about someone else, super, super strong link in your mind. And so what we've learned is if you use your own name to think about your problems, to try to problem solve and work through them, it automatically activates the brain machinery that we have for giving advice to others. And that makes it really helpful for us to work through our feelings. And it works really quick. So that's why I think of it as this like small jujitsu move that can make a difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's so crazy how we do it. And people don't like to say they talk to themselves, but talk to themselves more than they talk to anybody else in the whole world. So,
Well, let's pause there for a second because
yeah,
I hear quite a bit. Like when I give presentations on this stuff, I'll often open up, "Hey, you ever talk to yourself?" And half the room puts their hand up like, "Thank God you asked that question. Yes, all the time. I'm not crazy. I appreciate it." And then the other half of the room looks at them like they are in fact crazy.
like you're
Like,
fucking nuts, right?
yeah,
Like,
you're
what the
great.
fuck
Like,
is the matter with
no, I
you?
don't talk to myself. People are problem solving. So we all talk to ourselves at some points in time. If you want to just to clarify for people how this works, when I say talking to ourselves, or if I'm talking about the inner voice, what I'm talking about is our ability to silently use language to reflect on our lives. This is another one of those superpowers. If I asked you, Elliot, I'll give you my phone number, 209-0501. Memorize it. Repeat it in your head right now.
Yeah.
Silently. Don't say it
Okay.
out silently. You did it? You did it?
Yeah. Yeah. Got it.
Anyone who's listening, repeat that number. By the way, it's not my active number. I don't know who it calls, um, but repeat it in your head. You've just talked to yourself. Essentially, what you've just done is you've used language to keep a nugget of information active in your head. We do this all the time. You go to the grocery store. Hey, what do I have to buy? You think to yourself like yogurt, scallions, cheese sticks. My grocery list. So that's talking to yourself at a very basic level, and it's something we do every day. But we could also, of course, talk to ourselves for other reasons, like when we're planning what to say to someone during an interview or on a date, or when we're trying to make sense of why we screwed this up. We tell stories to ourselves to make sense of them. So we all do talk to ourselves quite a bit.
It's nuts. One of the biggest case studies of this conscious mind and that is so interesting to me is Tiger Woods. Um,
Oh yeah, he does.
because like
He does this a great Tiger Woods. You know when he
and but
boosts.
just his whole story as well too, like the unbeatable to the fall off, and it's not
Yeah,
like his golf game changed, right?
yeah.
His golf game didn't move other than what was going on in his conscious mind, right? So
Well,
so
I think I can't remember if I mentioned this when we were
yeah,
off mic or not, but so you jump in if I did. But I've been talking to lots of athletes and lots of high performers while I was researching the book and while talking about the book. And what you hear over and over again is the importance of the mind game, the mental game, the conscious mind. Because once you get to an elite level, as you know, you're surrounded by natural athletes with the best physical trainers. They are at peak condition, right? Like most of them. So what distinguishes those who really take it to the next level versus those that don't? Oftentimes, it is that ability to manage our emotions. I think I think about this as mental fitness, and I think we're increasingly beginning to admit just how important this is. I mean, when I was growing up, like you never talked about the mind piece of it all, right? Like you only talked about that if
you
things
couldn't
were
talk about anxiety and depression and all this stuff, and like it was like if you did, you were weak,
exactly.
you were ostracized.
But like a lot of, well, first of all, like if you experience anxiety or sadness at times, like one important thing to know is you should be congratulated. because that means you're a human being. We've evolved to be able to experience these emotions for a reason. In small doses, they actually help us. Let me give you my example of like a high stress or not event. Like, I give lots of presentations to different audiences, and some of these audiences, it's like the equivalent of going in the octagon. At least it is in my head, right? You got like these super smart people. Their only thing they want to do when I'm talking is find a hole in what I'm saying so they can mow me down, right? Like, there are these hostile audiences. And let me say, you're up in front of, hundreds or more people. Like, you don't want to get mowed down in front of everyone else. It's like
Sure.
getting choked out in the middle of the ring or whatever, is the worst consequence. Not good, I'm guessing, right? And
Not
so,
good.
I've given hundreds and hundreds of talks, and usually I get this, despite liking to speak publicly, enjoying it. Sometimes I get a little bit of butterflies in my stomach, a little nerves right before, or even a couple of days before. And you know what those nerves do? They motivate me to rehearse, to practice, to make sure I'm at peak form. There have been a few times where I've given presentations and I didn't experience any of that, and I don't think those presentations went as well because I didn't have that little bit of fuel. And there's science which shows that actually experiencing a little bit of anxiety or anxious arousal, as we call it, it actually boosts performance. And so here's the trick. The trick is you want to experience that anxiety, that anxious arousal to a certain point that's optimal. But once it goes above that, it becomes suboptimal. And then you start not performing well. And I think with Tiger, what we saw is he just unraveled when he had that accident, and it really was
Well, he got caught,
remarkable.
right? He got
Yeah,
caught all the sex stuff,
that
right?
too. I
Yeah.
conflated. It was an accident, and then he got no, or is it just he got caught?
No, no. So he had the accident because his wife was fucking chasing him with a
Oh,
golf club and she, right? Like he was
that's
running
right.
away from his
That's right.
wife because
That's right.
all of his shit came out. He
That's right.
recently had another accident where
That's right.
he's really hurt. But
That's right.
in '08 or whenever that was, it was when all the sex scandal came out. So
Yeah.
and then he just could not, like, yeah, he was, and you could even see it, like he was just a different human once he got caught and stopped, like, being a philanthropist, and or whatever, that not a philanthropist, that's somebody who gives their money away. So
Philanderer, you were very close. No,
philanderer, yeah, I
you're
was
close.
very close. Sorry. Um,
Um,
Man,
well,
so how let me ask you
yeah,
a question. How do we get to optimal? Like, give people
yeah,
some steps to, like, get to optimal, because that's a very fine line, optimal and then over the top. It's not a thick line where it's hard to go from one to the other. Like,
right.
you can
Well,
go bad quick.
totally. I think number one is being able to recognize when you are going into suboptimal zone, right? Sometimes people don't even realize they're already caught up in it by the time it's getting really severe. So I call this all chatter, right? Like, chatter is a shorthand to talk about when you're getting stuck in a thought loop. And people often ask me, "Hey, you're an expert on chatter. You've been studying this stuff for 20 years, doing blah blah blah. Do you ever experience it?" And I usually give them a little stare and I say, "Yeah, of course I experience it. I'm human at times." So what I've gotten really good at is I can sniff out that chatter the moment it starts to brew, and then I immediately take action without thinking. It is automatic, and I start implementing tools, techniques to lower the temperature, and that often helps. Sometimes it gets a little worse, but usually it really does help me, and that helps me stay in that optimal zone. So what are the tools? Let me give you a very quick framework for thinking about this, because as I mentioned before, I think you often hear, "Hey, there's this one thing you should do. It's going to make you better," right? Like, just meditate, just be in the moment. I've been doing research on this for a really long time. There is no single tool that works in all situations, right? Like, you need a toolkit, lots of
I'm a
tools,
meditator, and sometimes meditation doesn't fucking work.
right? My dad taught me to meditate when I was 5 years old. I love meditation. Nothing negative against meditation, right? Like, I think
Right.
it's a really useful tool, but there are lots of other ones too. So there are three categories of tools that listeners should be aware of. There are things you could do on your own, right? Like meditation. Then there are tools that involve our relationships with other people, ways of really harnessing our relationships and thinking carefully about who we interact with that can help. And then there are what I call environmental tools, ways of interacting with your physical spaces that can actually make a difference. And so let me give you a couple examples of each one. Can't get into, I wish we could
Yeah.
talk about them all, but we won't have
We
enough
gotta go
time.
back. We got to go back to work. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So I already told you about one tool, the distant self-talk, and that's my
Mhm.
go-to, right? Like the moment something I'm finding myself getting caught up, Ethan, this is ridiculous. This is going to be not, use your name to try to coach yourself through that problem. Another thing you could do is something
I
we
find that
call,
personally to be like the low hanging fruit, right? Like when I'm not too far down, right? Like when
yes.
if I'm not too far down the rabbit hole, I caught it really early. Generally, that one works for me. Then, do you find that as well?
I find that for me it works across the board,
Okay.
but if it's not too intense, that's all I have to do. If it is a more intense form of chatter, I'll often layer on other tools in addition to it.
Okay, that's
So
what I
it's
think.
kind
I'm
of
saying
like,
the same thing.
yeah, yeah. So like rather than like if you think of distant self-talk as like taking a Tylenol works when it's a medium headache, but if it's a migraine, I may take an Advil as well or some other things.
Right. Got it. Okay.
Of course, we're not talking about any pills here. There's no pills on this show. So here's another easy one I use a lot: mental time travel. Right. What this involves is often when we get stuck in chatter, we're totally immersed in the awfulness of what could be, and it's all we could think about in a very narrow way. If we step back, that can often help. And one way of stepping back is to think about how we're going to feel about this thing that's bugging us down the road, a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. What often happens when people do that is they realize that as bad as it is or could be, those are unstable feelings. They're eventually going to fade. Like you think about getting dumped by someone you really love, right? You think about maybe you've been rejected in the past, and most people do recover eventually from that rejection. Like, so it really hurts right now, but how are you going to feel about this 6 months later? Well, you'll probably move on to something else. And so engaging in that mental time travel can be really helpful. Um, like think about a match that didn't go well. How are you going to feel about that potential loss? If you're just, oh my God, what if I lose this thing? Well, you're going to feel pretty bad, I would say, 5 minutes after you lose. But what about 6 months from now, right? When lots of other things have happened. So that's another thing you could do on your own that can often be quite helpful. If we shift buckets here, if we go to actually, before I shift buckets, let me tell you about one other thing. Do a ritual. Have you ever done rituals when you were
Yeah.
when you're competing? You have any
Yeah.
fun ones you want to share with people?
Uh, Look for me, and I figured this out late in my career. It was eat sushi because I
Ah,
love sushi, and it became it. I discovered it very weirdly, in a sense of like I was very nervous one night before I competed, and I had to show up to the arena because I had to coach my athlete, an athlete of mine, and then she was at like 6 o'clock, and I was the main event at 10 o'clock, so it was 4 hours in between, and I'm like, man, what am I gonna do? I'm fucking nervous. What am I gonna sit here and just be nervous? I was like, man, my favorite sushi restaurant's right down the street. I'm gonna go eat that goddamn sushi and fucking sit there, hang out with them, and like it totally calmed my nerves. And then like, it became this like thing. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go eat sushi because that is
yeah,
what Elliot likes to do.
nice. And you just did Elliot also right there,
Yes,
purposely.
yes.
Totally. Well. So it's interesting. So where are you from, by the way, Elliot?
I grew
Are
up in South Jersey. So I grew up in South Jersey. I'm a Philly fan.
okay.
In my sports, I had a little hiatus with the Eagles with Michael Vick, but I'm a pit bull fan. I've been a pit bull owner my whole adult life. So,
Got it. Okay. I went to school in Philly,
where'd you go?
um, I went to University of Pennsylvania.
All right, cool. My mom wanted me to go there. I didn't get in.
Well, that, that that's
You took my spot. I'll tell her that you're the one who took my spot, Ethan. We're 41
that's
years
right. We're
old.
the same. We're the
Both of
same.
us, it's your fault. God damn it.
We're the same. We're the same. Same vintage. Um, I was a Yankees fan growing up, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Different leagues, so they're
not your
not too
fault.
competitive. We'll move on. So but
I
on
digress.
On sports, what's interesting, so Rafael Nadal,
Hmm.
one of the best tennis players of all time, he was interviewed a couple years back, and someone asked him, "Hey, what's the hardest thing you struggle to do on the tennis court?" And he says, to me, this really stood out. Hardest thing I struggle to do is battle the voice inside my head, right? Not keep up with his opponent, but the voice in his head. And what does he do? If you've ever watched him play, you've already seen what he does. He engages in these elaborate rituals. So if all you're doing is eating sushi, you've got a pretty streamlined one. Nadal always makes sure to like walk onto the court the same way each time with a bag over his shoulder and carrying a racket. And then when he gets to his bench, he always puts them down the same way, make sure to turn to the crowd as he like unbuttons his jacket, bouncing on his feet. It's really very regimented. And he often gets made fun of for doing that, as I don't know, maybe someone would think your sushi habit is a little weird. Like growing up, Wade Boggs, if you remember him, is a third
Yeah.
baseman for the
Third
Yankees.
baseman for the Yankees. Yep.
He used to eat a bucket of fried chicken every single game before the game. Like, and he would get made fun of for that. What we've learned is that these rituals, these are not just kind of weird tics that people engage in. They actually serve a function. What they do is rituals are something that they're a rigid sequence of behavior. So you do it the same way every time. So you're always eating sushi before a match, right? Like you're doing it the same thing each time. What that does is it gives people a sense of control. When we're struggling with our minds, we often feel like our minds are in control of us. Like I can't, this thoughts are taking all, I can't stop thinking about this. What happens with a ritual is you're controlling, you're doing the same thing the same way each time. And that makes us feel more in control of ourselves, which can be useful for managing stress and anxiety.
I have to cut you off here a little bit because I have a question about it too.
Yeah,
Um, I don't let the not eating sushi fuck with me though. Like if I can't make it
good.
happen.
Well,
So
but
like
that,
how do you do that, right? Because sometimes like I used to go down like the deep end of this shit of right because again it's this slippery slope where oh my god I didn't have it on my right shoulder, it was on my left shoulder and blah blah, and then you can just I'm fucked, there's no way I can win. So obviously Nadal being one of the best tennis players in the world also can perform when the moment isn't perfect.
well, Elliot, what you're describing though is the signature of optimal mental performance in this context. So let's step back. I'm talking to you about tools. Let's think
Yes.
for a second about how tools work. Like there's a proper way to use a tool. And when you use a
Mhm.
tool properly, it serves a function, right? You get a hammer and a nail, and you pound the nail with the right force, you build a house, maybe with some other
Yes.
tools too and expertise.
Yeah,
But
for
if you
sure.
use that hammer the wrong way, right? If you're pounding too hard, or if you're using a hammer to like, uh,
Clean the
you know,
window,
clean
then
the
you break the
window,
window.
not good. And
Right.
so it's not just about knowing what these tools are, but it's then also about being able to use them intelligently, as you're describing. So where rituals can some people hear me talk about rituals and they immediately think of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where you
Sure.
are engaging in rituals to the point where it's disrupting your life, because if you don't have the sushi, then you're not going to even walk into the ring, right? The octagon. Sorry,
It's okay.
octagon.
It's all the same.
You
It's
can do all the
some
same.
people
Okay,
fight in rings. That the UFC is the octagon, but people fight in rings, people fight in cages, people do all kinds of shit. It's all good.
got it. Okay, so like you don't want that to happen. You want to be flexible, and I think that's part of what I find so attractive of having an entire toolkit, not just knowing
Mhm.
about one thing, but hey, if this isn't working, let me iterate and use another tool. So let's go to another category, those other people. So, so I'll do distant self-talk, and I'll mental time travel. I'll sometimes like do a ritual. But when that's not working, I'll go and tap into my network. I've got like chatter advisors, if you will, or chatter coaches. Who are these people? These are people in my life who are really skilled at helping coach me through a situation. Now, I think a lot of people are aware that other people can help us, but what is often not understood is other people can hurt us too. And you've got to find the right people to coach you, the right people to advise you. So let me give you a concrete example. A lot of people think that the way to deal with these negative thought loops is to just find someone to vent to just unload. Now, there's been a lot of research on this, and what we learn is like venting can make two people feel really close and connected. So you and I, we get over our Yankee Philly little issue. We're buddies. We could talk, lay it out, and it feels good to know that I can call you, and you're going to take the time to listen to me without judgment, accept what I'm going to say, and be there to support me. If all you do though
I don't really hate
is
the Yankees, by the way.
okay, well now I could really call you. Uh, if all I do is just vent, I'm going to feel great about our relationship, but I'm going to leave that conversation all worked up. If you've ever looked at people who vent,
Oh,
like,
we were so bad about this in my business, right? We had the top guys, we would only vent to each other, and
yeah,
uh we wouldn't even like say, "Hey, look, I need to vent for 1 minute," and then we're I think that really works sometimes, venting, but there
sure.
has to be some rules around it, not just this. I go, you go, I go, you go.
That's right. That's right. That's right. You're just this like vent session, not productive. So the trick is this. You do need to have people you could let it out for a little bit. That's very important. But at a certain point in the conversation, what you ideally want the person you're talking to do is help you reframe how you're thinking about this. All right, you got it out. Well, let's look at the big picture now. Look,
Right.
it's one match among many, and here's how maybe you could do this better, or here's what happened to me when I was in this situation. So you want to go from listening to reframing, and not everyone knows how to help other people do that. And so I think knowing about how this works is there are two benefits that come from that knowledge. Number one, you can be a better chatter coach or advisor to other people. So when your athletes come to you for support, you listen, you take the time to listen, but at a certain point in the conversation, you help them go broad. And different people need to spend different amounts of time venting before they're ready to go broad and reframe how they're thinking about it. Maybe you ask them, hey, I hear you. I totally agree. Can I give you a piece of advice? Or look, what do here's another way to think about it. So you could be a better coach to others, but importantly, you can think really carefully about your relationships and think, hey, who are the people in my life who don't just get me an event, but actually help me work through these problems? Once you identify those people, that's your board. That's your chatter board of advisors. Those are the people you go to for support. So,
I
that's our
like that.
relationships.
Chatter board of advisors. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about companies, how companies work.
Mhm.
Companies have like the most successful companies in the world. They all have got a board of advisors. Who are on those boards? People who are exceptionally good at what they do, navigating companies to success, in particular when they're under crisis, when they've got important issues to deal with. I
And these
think we
people
would
necessarily don't work in the business, right? They're the board.
absolutely. They come from different industries. They have different pockets of expertise. So I have a board. Like I've got one close friend from who does what I do. I've got a couple of relatives. I've got people from, you know, uh, my book agent is on the board. So it's a really diverse set of people who can weigh in and assist. And I think we'd all be much better off if we thought carefully, number one, about who should be on those boards and then nurture those relationships. Like before I started doing some of this work, I would just talk haphazardly to people. I'd go to like some relatives, and what I'd realize is like they love me a lot. Like all they want is for me to be happy and healthy, right? And
It's
yet
not ill-intentioned.
not their intentions. And after every conversation, I would just feel worse. So that's not what we want.
And sometimes in those conversations, they just like confirm your opinions already, right? And that didn't help you,
That
right?
didn't help.
Not at
That's
all.
right. Because so here are the two pieces. If we want to get even more fine grained, we have two needs. We have these what we call social and emotional needs. We all want to feel validated and accepted and loved by others. And when my daughter comes to me and I say, you could tell me anything, sweetie, just tell me I love you. And I just listen, and she feels that connection, that emotion, that warmth. But we have a second need. We have this, we call this a cognitive need. And what that needed, we need to be able to think about this problem in a way that helps us work through it. And that you don't just get that with a hug. You
Right.
also need some restructuring of how you think about stuff. So something to keep in mind.
Ethan, I want to ask you a question here because I try to make sure that the listeners always have some information and some steps, right?
Yeah,
Like of like the actual information. But I also have this thing where I like people to understand how a human being got to their space in life, right?
right.
Because so often we're like, oh well, I'm into this, and that's not going to make me any money. I'm not going to be able to do that, so I'm going to give up on my passion to this thing that I love, and I'm going to go over here. I'm going to get a desk job, and I just think that's such a fucked up way. I think that's how we end up depressed and anxiety and all this
Yeah.
shit, right? Is you spend the majority of your time doing shit you don't really fucking like. So I want to hear about your personal story here a little bit. How did you get to this kind of work? What brought you here?
Well, for me, I didn't know it at the time, but my path started when I was about 5 years old, or maybe it was a little earlier, 4 or 5, when my dad started at a very young age talking to me about these kinds of issues. Like I had this unconventional dad who, on the one hand, he was your stereotypical New Yorker. He loved the Yankees. He had a big bushy mustache, cigarette, cursed everyone out when he drove, but he also loved meditating. He'd like meditate while he was, smoking.
Meditate while smoking and yelling at the
Yeah,
fucking
yeah, like
guy
hanging,
driving down the
yeah,
street.
yeah, with the big bushy mustache and taking, 5 years old, he took me to get a mantra, and so he would talk to me about going in, and call it like very corny, going inside when I was upset, like try to find the answer to your problems, introspect. And I kind of brushed it off growing up and wanted to become like the shortstop for the Yankees. Turns out that wasn't in my future, but
A-Rod's our age too.
yeah, exactly.
And so is Jeter. So you were
Either
fucked.
it was not. I quickly figured out it was not my
Yeah.
my path. Um, But I keep thinking about the kinds of stuff he talked about, like in the background. I would use those principles. Like I'd ask a girl out in high school, she'd say no. All right, figure it out. All right, Ethan, what are you going to do? Move on. And I was really good at managing my emotions, my thoughts, like really very effective. Then I got to college and I took my first class in psychology. And about halfway through the semester, I started learning about the things that my dad and I were talking about. Like, hey, lots of people have looked at what does it mean to go inside or introspect, and is it good or is it bad? And what I found is, for a lot of people, a lot of the time, directly contrast to what my dad had told me, like turning their attention inward to reflect on their emotions made them feel worse.
Yeah.
And so that to me was puzzling. So why is it that sometimes this helps people focusing on their problems to work through them, but other times it hurts them? And so I got really interested in that. And the real pivotal moment for me was I found that I would start, like, whenever I'd be studying for an exam. I'd like used to study in the bookstore in Philadelphia, and I'd go on breaks to the psychology section. I like thumb through books and like just look at them for fun. Or on a Saturday night, like when we're walking to a bar with my friends in college, I'd be like talking to them about this stuff. And they're like, "What's wrong with you, Ethan? Like, why are you talking to us about like psychology and emotions? 11:30 at night, we're going to the
You're
bar."
trying to get laid, man.
Up. And so all what I kept thinking was, well, if I'm spending my spare time thinking about this stuff, maybe I should like spend my life doing it and make that into a career. And that's how I stumbled into psychology. And I've really, I think I'm really lucky. I count my blessings, so to speak, that I get to spend my time trying to answer questions that have potential to help people.
I've got three questions for you to end here. One I've never asked anybody else before on the podcast, so we'll start with that one. Pats or Geno's, bro?
Geno's.
God, now we have a problem. Two, two. I do believe everyone in the world has this unique and special kind of power. Let's say, this thing that makes them amazing in the world. Not that makes them a ton of money or anything like that, or fame, or what's your thing? What's your power?
Um, I think it's positively reframing and sticking to that big picture positive outlook. I get bummed when something bad happens, but I recover really quick, and I
Okay,
think that's really served me well.
nice. And the last question is, look, uh, I'm not Rogan, I'm not Ferris, I'm not Jocko. This probably won't do much for you, right? As far as like, I don't know, maybe you'll sell a book or two, right? But I mean, how much did you book? $30. So, I'll
20,
get you
28. To
28.99. So
yeah.
whatever. So it's this isn't going to change your life. I can't blow up your brand or anything like that. So why do this? Like, why come on some dude's podcast that you've never met before? When you Google him, it's him punching somebody in the face, and things like
I
that.
love this question. And it's I'm glad you asked it. And the reason is that um, I think the science that I talk about in my book and that we do work on has the potential to really help people and inform them. And so I want to get the message out to as many people as we can, have them think this stuff through, figure out what it does for them. And so the more people who can listen, I think that's a real bonus. So
Yeah,
that's why I do it.
yeah. No, I'm always just interested to hear people's like whys, like why do this,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
um,
I don't, I think every audience matters because what we're talking about is the mind, and
mhm.
everyone's got one, right? So I don't want to discriminate and say, well, I'm going to talk to this group in who in this industry, but not this one. I think these are universally applicable messages, and the more we can do to get them out, the better.
I 100% agree. Um, Thanks for coming on. I greatly appreciate your time. If people want to buy your book or find you online, social media, where is that? Where are the best places?
www.ethankross with a Kross.com, and Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can find me at any of those.
All those places. All right. I appreciate it. Again, guys, as always, Ethan has his unique and special power. I have my unique and special thing and power that I do. Go out in the world. Don't try to be Ethan. Don't try to be Elliot. Go out there and find your power.